Hello and welcome to the RAIC Corporate Affiliate Series. My name is Pamela Burke and I am the Education Administrator at the RAIC. Our corporate affiliate for today's webinar is Velux. For over 75 years, the Velux Group has been the world leader in the manufacturing of residential skylights and is one of the strongest international brands in the building materials sector. With over 300 patents in skylight design, Velux is known for product innovation, quality, and durability. For over a decade, Velux Canada has been ramping up its commercial product line to serve the Canadian market better. Their commercial program includes the Commercial Sun Tunnel Tubular Skylight, the revolutionary Dynamic and Energy Dome Skylights, and more recently, the Velux Modular Skylight VMS, a prefabricated modular skylight designed in collaboration with Foster & Partners. Velux continues to lead the residential industry with the no-leak skylight, sun tunnel skylights, roof windows, as well as a range of blinds, installation solutions, and intelligent home controls. Whether your project is residential or commercial, offer your customers the innovation and quality they deserve at an affordable price. For more information, please visit velux.ca/professionals. Today's presentation is titled Designing for Wellness Using Daylight from Skylights, presented by Monica Bulos. Monica graduated from Carleton University's Azrieli School of Architecture and Urbanism in 2018 and gained experience working in the IBI Group Architects head office in Toronto during her summer terms. Now, as the Architectural Project Coordinator at Velux Canada, she has established a great appreciation for the role of daylight and fresh air in good design. Monica has been working alongside architects on commercial projects that include institutional, civic, cultural, retail, and office buildings, as well as smaller residential and renovation projects. Currently, she is working on gathering and developing research to educate the architecture community about daylighting design. And now, today's presentation.
Welcome, and thank you for joining me for today's webinar. We are excited to team up with RAIC for the Corporate Affiliate Series discussing wellness in design. And today we will be talking about designing for wellness using daylight from skylights. My name is Monica and I'm the Architectural Project Coordinator at Velux. I have a background in architecture, which informs much of my work at Velux, working with architects and contractors to see how skylights can be a part of their design, as well as my own daylight and design research, which is then presented in webinars such as this to educate the design and architecture community. So in this presentation, we will explore the benefits of daylight compared to artificial light that affects the human physiology, mental capacity, and emotional well-being of people, why buildings designed for daylight can contribute to a healthy indoor environment, which then promotes the health and wellness of the people occupying them, how best to design for daylight from skylights in a given project, review our commercial product line, which includes domes, sun tunnels, and our Velux modular skylight system, and discuss their appropriate applications. Case studies and examples that can provide daylighting precedents and communicate the design and technical support that our architectural project team can offer. And at the end of the session, participants will be able to identify the unique qualities and benefits of daylight versus artificial light as it relates to human health, development, and comfort, analyze the use of daylighting design strategies and principles using skylights, apply product knowledge to choose the appropriate skylight for their project, and recognize buildings using daylighting from above that emphasize the well-being of people that use the space. So you may already be familiar with the Velux brand. Velux is the world leader in skylights. We were founded in 1941 in Denmark, and today we are in 40 countries around the world. And Velux is still owned by the founding family and foundations set up by the family, and through our foundations, we support a number of research, educational, and philanthropic activities. And at Velux, we believe in the importance of daylight in architecture, and that is why we work so hard to inspire and educate designers and architects on the benefits of the aesthetic experience, comfort, and health of adding daylight and fresh air from above. Velux supports research around the world, challenges students internationally, and celebrates practitioners who exceed at daylight in architecture. And Velux is not just a manufacturer of skylights and roof windows. We really are a champion for daylight in architecture. I want to briefly mention a new initiative for our company. In September 2020, Velux launched our sustainable strategy for 2030. The name has a dual meaning. It's our nature. We set clear goals to achieve this by 2030, that we would have zero emission vehicle fleet, 30% less travel by plane, single material and recyclable packaging, circular economy targets to be set in 2021 of this year, and a 50% reduction in embodied carbon. And we are hoping to be lifetime CO2 neutral by our 100th anniversary in 2041. So Velux will share the approach to encourage other building material companies to follow. We are teaming up with the WWF to capture our lifetime carbon through strategic initiatives, and we are really proud of this commitment and our movement towards a more sustainable vision. And that fits in really well with our core company as our core values as a company. VE is short for ventilation, and Lux is the Latin word for light. We believe that our communities deserve good design, and we believe that fresh air and daylight are essential elements for good design that can have a really positive effect on people's daily lives. So today we're going to be focusing on daylight and how that relates to wellness, but also check out Russell's presentation about designing for wellness using fresh air from Skylights, where he takes a deeper dive on indoor air quality and natural ventilation. So how does daylight contribute to well-being? Winston Churchill had famously said, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." And as a politician, he understood the incredible influence that building had on us as humans. They're not just merely structures and buildings, but they're shapers of human life. Architects are amongst the greatest facilitators of the human experience because architectural design directly affects the well-being of society. This is an image by Adolphe Bayer, which expresses really well Le Corbusier's vision for cities of light and air. The sun is the master of life. Society will no longer tolerate a situation where entire families are cut off from the sun and thus doomed to declining health. So there is a connection to the quality of life we live and our accessibility to daylight, which can often be taken for granted. It is certain that our bodies and minds need the sun. Humankind has always had an innate connection to the sun and has relied on its resources for health and flourishing. And the sun is the central entity for sustenance on a biological and emotional level. Light from the sun is fundamentally unique and has the highest light and spectral variations needed to support biological functions. Without the sun, we simply could not be sustained. And without daylight, we cannot flourish. In fact, a lack of daylight can have extremely negative effects on us. We can experience less energy, mental capacity, seasonal depression, and even increased risk to infection and disease. We need exposure to daylight for visual comfort and health. And our eyes do more than just see light. Our bodies respond to the different aspects of the light spectrum, not just visible light. Artificial light is simply not a good enough substitute for daylight. So shown here is the intensity of light by wavelength for natural light compared to typical artificial light sources. And no artificial light sources have been able to mimic daylight's variation in the light spectrum. It's important to note that only 40% of daylight is visible radiation, while the remaining is infrared and ultraviolet wavelengths. As I said before, we need the sun for more than just seeing. The sun's radiation affects our bodies, minds, emotional health, and behavior. The sun's nutrients influence countless factors of the human physiology and behavior, which are governed by the circadian rhythm, which is our 24-hour biological clock. So we are genetically bound to the natural rhythms of daylight to guide the body in cellular growth and the secretion of hormones. These variations stimulate the body's biological master clock on a cellular level, which includes the promotion of the processing of proteins. There's also non-visual input of daylight that is needed to synthesize vitamin D into calcium. It also regulates melatonin, which is related to sleep, and cortisol, which is related to stress. And ultimately, daylight ensures that our bodies are well maintained and balanced from day to day. Circadian rhythms are kept in sync by various cues, including daylight levels throughout the day, which the body responds to in a way facilitated by a group of photosensitive cells found in the retina. And this is the eye's non-image forming photoreceptors. And lights of high frequency and intensity promote alertness, while the lack of this stimulus signals the body to reduce energy and prepare for rest. We also see that several studies have found daylight to improve many elements of people's experience in the world. This includes how quickly children learn and retain information, shown up to 18%. 46% more daylight can help patients with pain relief and recovery by up to 21%. And even productivity has been shown to improve by up to 15% with greater exposure to daylight. The World Green Building Council summarized even more of these benefits here. You see an increase in memory, higher test scores, and quicker patient recovery. Even note the increase in retail sales up to 40%. So we see here that daylight is extremely powerful in our everyday lives. There's also this element of view and surroundings. Sometimes it really is what about our eyes are seeing too. Looking outside changes the inside. When you open the interior to the sky and the surrounding landscape, the perception of the room is altered entirely. Suddenly it becomes a doorway to the outside, a place with plenty of daylight, space, and a connection to nature. And this draws back to the idea of biophilic design and how that can come to play in our emotional well-being and comfort, as well as thermal and visual comfort, which are also important elements to consider. You can have exterior views that absolutely transform the essence and expression of the interior of your space. This doorway to the sky provides views to outside, both the surrounding landscape and the sky. And both are really important for psychological and visual comfort. A view with layers of sky, city, landscape, and the ground all have this visual variation. It's also able to expand the visual experience, incorporating both the surrounding landscape as well as the daily variations in the sky, because daylight is never normal. You can also have a better grasp on the time of day, and this is also going to help the circadian rhythm and that 24-hour clock. It's also able to make the space feel bigger and brighter. You can experience less eye fatigue when the light is more balanced and coming from multiple sources. And overall, we naturally enjoy these kinds of spaces more. So how do you design for this? Well, daylight is most powerful from above. Roof windows and skylights have shown to provide up to 2 to 3 times more daylight than facade windows. And a good rule of thumb we like to use is the more sky you see, the more daylight you get. And we have to remember that the sun is an extremely dynamic light source, and there's diversity of daylight. So you have multiple light sources It can be direct, so think of a sunny day with lots of direct sunlight. That's about 100,000 lux to put a measure of light in your mind. You can also have indirect light. So when daylight is passing through particles and water vapor that's in the atmosphere, portions are being scattered by dust and suspended particles. And then we also have reflected light. In fact, 10 to 15% of total daylight reaching a building is reflected from ground or neighboring buildings and surfaces. And what's important to note is that we need around 500 lux to perform most tasks without the need of artificial light. And there are many factors that can affect daylighting in a building. You have your sky conditions, location, surroundings of the site. There's obstruction, orientation, the building's shape and size, interior materials, and reflectivity. There's a long list of factors. And the question is, how are you going to design your spaces to overcome these challenges in light of understanding the importance of daylight for people? And considering the placement of skylights can bring much daylight in spite of these challenges. It's also important to understand the relationship of certain activities and how much light is recommended. This is really useful when designing for occupant comfort. So having the right amount of light is really important to reduce eye strain, and having comfortable light that is sufficient for the task and also easy on the eyes. And some examples from this table can include easy office work, which needs about 250 lux, classrooms, which need about 300, normal office work and libraries needing about 500, and more detail-oriented work is going to need even more light. So this is a really useful chart to have for targets for daylighting. Another reason to consider skylights is that deep rooms are vulnerable to daylight starvation. So this is a common commercial office plan. You have a really large floor plate that may have some small offices along the perimeter and remaining offices and desks in the open air space, often with little to no access to windows. And only a small percentage of seating will have adequate or comfortable daylighting. In many locations on this floor plan, people will have to turn on their artificial light to do the tasks that they need to do. And drawing on from personal experience, and I'm sure with many other people that have worked in an office, it is very difficult sometimes to have access or adequate access to daylight. So this is a classroom scenario, a digital model that shows vertical glazing. So it's very apparent that there's simply not enough daylight for any of those desks in that room. The light is not reaching into the space far enough, so you'd still have to turn on artificial light to do the tasks of reading and writing. Common solution that a lot of architects like to go towards is floor to ceiling glazing. And that will bring a lot more light, but the desk closest to the facade will experience a lot of uncomfortable glare, while the other desks in the room are still not receiving adequate daylighting. More than half of the room would still need to require to turn on their artificial lights to read and write. Then we go to the third scenario, and this is showing the reduced facade window back to its original treatment, and then adding 2 skylights, which brings us up to 20% glazing to floor area ratio. The daylight here is well balanced with little glare and is distributed a lot more evenly throughout the entirety of the space and reducing your overall glazing area. So point is that with skylights, you can get more light and more comfortable light when daylighting from above. Also consider using circulation spaces and stairwells. It is a great way to bring light down multiple levels of your building. It's also really effective in bringing daylight to those deeper and more central areas of the building that are farther away from vertical windows and may be starved for daylight. So thinking of designing these circulation spaces to be more open, which can also create opportunities to share and borrow daylight with other interior spaces. And as much as we want more daylight in our buildings, we often don't want the added heat that comes from them. And we call this solar heat gain. Solar heat gain is the fraction of incident solar radiation that passes through the window. And solar heat gain is a major concern for all high performance buildings, even those with modest glazing. So this is a really important consideration when selecting a skylight. You can reduce solar heat gain, and this is a similar approach to how you would consider glare control. Choosing a skylight with a lower solar heat gain coefficient can be really useful. Also using internal or external blinds. And since solar heat gain is a factor of area, you can also reduce the size of your skylight area. Another consideration is turning the skylight away from the sun and thinking of how sun path diagrams and orientation can play in this. And here's an example of that. Turning away from the sun that can look facing your skylights north. And this comes from a basic understanding of the path of the sun in the northern hemisphere. Sun is rising in the east, it's setting in the west, and always in the southern sky. And this way you can reduce direct light when facing your skylights to the north, especially when you have a steeper angle for your skylights. It's important to note that the sky also becomes a secondary source of daylight, as it is reflected daylight from the particles in the sky and clouds. And you can still receive a lot of daylight from the north. And north-facing skylights can provide a nice, even, diffused light with reduced glare and reduced solar heat gain due to its limited direct sunlight. The location of your skylights matter also and can make a difference in the experience of daylight in a space. Having your skylights against a wall allows the wall surface to reflect light inward. We see light when it hits the surface, and that's important to note because the wall will become immediately illuminated, and this can increase the perceived brightness in a space. The geometry or form of the building can also come into play. This building is showing sloped walls. The vertical windows then become angled slightly towards the sky, and the sloped walls are being directly illuminated by the skylights above. Color is also a really important element. White has the lowest absorption properties and will reflect light more than any other color. Cutting through the core of a space, and in this case, it's cutting through the core of the house. So sections of the floor plate on all the levels are carved out to allow for one large skylight to bring light down to each space. So think about having one skylight to do many different jobs based on placement and the design of the rest of the floor plates and spaces. And this leads to this idea of borrowing daylight from a single source by designing interior spaces to be more open. The light shaft design is also an important thing to consider. In this project, it's using a relatively small skylight, but the light shaft is huge and it's flared. One of the boxes in this design has the sole purpose to house the skylight and light shaft cut into the flat roof. So this is going to give a soft glow into the expanse of the light shaft. There's less direct light due to a smaller area of skylight, and more light is being diffused and reflected off of the surfaces of the light shaft itself. This is similar in that it is a grid of flared skylights or pyramid skylights. So the architect of this project designed the ceiling as 56 sunrises. It has multiple pyramid light shafts with roof windows at the tip of each of them, and they're located and designed at different angles to ensure that there's even lighting in the space at all times of the day. It's a really super clever design. The light shafts are relatively deep, as you see in the section, but it optimizes daylight in the space. So each light shaft is flared to create the pyramid so that each of the glossy surfaces of the light shaft are reflecting the light downward. And this minimizes the horizontal ceiling area between each of the light shafts, which would typically be perceived as the darkest part of the ceiling due to the contrast of the light from the shaft. And here we are looking at two digital models that are comparing flared openings versus straight openings. So they both have comparable glazing area. And the flared opening is bringing so much more daylight into the space compared to the digital model that has straight light shafts. So this is because there is the reduction of the horizontal surfaces, which is going to increase the perception of light in the space. You're seeing more of the lit surfaces of the light shaft that are reflecting daylight entering inside the building. And this again goes back to the idea that we see light when it hits a surface. You're also able to reduce your overall skylight area because of this. And the point is that you can bring more light in space by considering the design of your light shaft, especially flaring the surfaces of the light shaft. Playing around with the repetition of elements and surfaces on your ceiling in relation to the skylight opening is also another way to bring in a lot of daylight in your space. By having this repetition of surfaces, you're able to have more light reflecting inwards off of more surfaces and more surface area. And using white to increase the reflection and the feeling of spaciousness, it's also going to provide more reflected and diffused and even light and less direct light. And this is a project that is showing a seamless skylight with a mirrored light shaft. You're seeing that you're able to bring much of the outside inside. You can't actually see the trees from this angle, but you can see it in the reflection. So you're able to extend the inside to the outside, and this is going to open up your space. It's also going to reflect more light inside because of the reflective nature and material of mirrors. And this also draws back on the idea that the more sky you see, the more daylight you get. So as you're reflecting more of the sky itself into the interior of the building, you're going to have more daylight in the space. So all in all, there are many creative ways to go about designing buildings with plenty of daylight. The emphasis is that daylight is an essential part of that. And at Velux, we believe that both daylight and fresh air are key elements to designing healthy buildings. One consideration is the active house principle. The active house looks at three thresholds: comfort, energy, and environment. Some of the programs and standards you may be familiar with are built around energy, which can often miss the elements of comfort. An active house is built around comfort as the primary design driver. Active house was born out of a need to prove that you can have a proper amount of natural light and fresh air and still build an energy efficient home. And ultimately, active house recognizes that human well-being is connected with a healthy indoor climate and key elements of daylight and fresh air. So how can you select the best skylight? It's important to understand that designing with daylight is a thoughtful balance of considering the quantity and the quality of daylight. And it's equally important to know what kind of light will be provided by different product selection. There's such diversity in the types of projects that are designed, from residential to commercial, institutional, industrial, community buildings, the list goes on. And different buildings will have different roof types and ceilings. There is also diversity in the types of spaces and activities that are taking place in these spaces. And with that comes diversity in the needs of daylight in terms of quantity and quality. And with that comes diversity in product selection. So it's important to know what skylight is best suited for the daylighting needs of your project. Sometimes an important element to your space is having a view to the outside and to the sky. You may also want a view to the outside in spaces where you are spending most of your time. And most of our product line offers with glass, acrylic, or clear polycarbonate. These are also the product options that are going to allow for direct daylight. So the Velux modular skylight, or VMS for short, traditional commercial domes, circular domes, SkyMax, roof windows, and unit skylights will all provide a view to the outside and to the sky, as well as direct daylight. Dynamic domes and sun tunnels, however, will not allow for a view. Dynamic domes have an inner white prismatic layer, and sun tunnels have different kinds of diffusers, and both of these will allow for diffused light and will not offer a view to the outside. Understanding what products offer glare control and what spaces will require it is also important. Spaces where you are spending lots of time working, reading, writing. This may include classrooms, libraries, office spaces, museums and galleries too. There is a concern of deterioration due to exposure to the sun, and they may want to avoid direct light. In these kinds of spaces, you want adequate daylight, but also comfortable light. You don't want a lot of glare or hot spots. Intense light that will increase eye fatigue is what you're trying to avoid. Even light, not a lot of direct light, and diffuse light would be preferred for occupant comfort in some of these kinds of spaces. So there's considerations which include blinds, the orientation of your skylights, and glazing types and coatings. With the VMS system and unit skylights, there can be blinds. Different colors will have different light transmittance. So black would act as a blackout blind. White could act more of a light filtering blind. You can also have blinds on the interior, which is most common in Canada. And also having them on the exterior is a possibility. And this will also help to mitigate solar heat gain as well as reduce your cooling loads. Different coatings on the glass to reduce your solar heat gain and visual transmittance. This plays a role also in the energy considerations. So that's another important element. And thinking of the orientation, having skylights facing the north to allow for more indirect and diffuse light opposed to direct light. And not all of our product selection has the option of blinds. We can do blinds for VMS, for the flat roof skylights, and residential skylights and roof windows. VMS can also do external blinds from a third party. Dynamic domes and sun tunnels do not have blinds. However, the diffusing material that is offered will diffuse the light, so you won't have direct light. And quick note for sun tunnels, though there are not blinds, there is an electric dimmer. Wasco, circular domes, and SkyMax also do not have blinds as an option. Another way to control glare and reduce the intensity of direct light is through different glazing options. We offer different glass upgrades with varying levels of sun protection coatings, which are meant to mitigate solar heat gain. They can dramatically decrease your visual transmittance and will affect your color rendering index, which is the color of the light through the window. This doesn't just affect the light coming in, it also affects the view out through the skylight. So there is some kind of a payoff when you are looking to have lower solar heat gain. It's also going to affect your visual transmittance and your color rendering index. Since solar heat gain can be such a concern, especially in high performance buildings, it's important to know the ratings for different product selection. Residential curb mounts and deck mount skylights, as well as VMS, will offer the lowest solar heat gain coefficients. So that's important. It's important to know the different ratings for these products. Orientation is an important factor, as mentioned. Facing the skylights north and having a steeper pitch to reduce your solar heat gain, as it rarely receives direct light. The north will receive diffused and even light throughout the day with very little glare. The VMS system has a configuration called the north light, which is integrated into the slope of the roof and can be pitched between 25 degrees to 90 degrees. So it's important to know what skylight products are able to be sloped on your roof at a steeper angle. So residential curb mounts can be sloped up to 60 degrees. Not noted here is deck mount skylights, which can be pitched up to 85 degrees. And the VMS Northlight configuration, which we just saw in the previous slide, can be sloped up to 90 degrees. Another way to control glare and direct sunlight is considering products that can diffuse the light based on the design and the material. Most skylights have come to mind are often clear glass or plastic that will allow for direct daylight. But there will be projects where having an even distribution of light as well as the diffusion of light with no hotspots or glare is more appropriate. Certain spaces that conduct specific kinds of tasks may suggest diffused light over direct light. So I mentioned these options previously. Sun tunnels and dynamic domes, these are great options for providing diffused light. Sun tunnels are useful when you have a greater distance between your roof deck and your ceiling. It has an extremely reflective tubing interior to reflect daylight farther down into your space. It also has reflective interior with 3 different diffusing lenses for hard ceiling, suspended ceiling, or open ceiling. Dynamic domes have the octahedron shape that's going to allow for a broader spread of light in the space. It also has the white prismatic interior layer, as I mentioned previously, which will diffuse the light 100% inside, so you will get 0 glare and 0 hotspots in the space. So just briefly showing some projects that Velux has been able to provide support in, where daylight has been an important element in the design. This is a kindergarten school in Austria. There are central atriums and courtyards in the design, and they play 2 main purposes. So they encourage the community and interaction between each of the programmatic areas of the space. You get to see what others are doing. It's really playful, an open environment. This is perfect for little kids. And daylight. Daylight was a huge element in the design. The design created a lot of opportunities for light to penetrate into central and core parts of the plan. They allow for borrowing daylight between the spaces with interior vertical glazing and grabbing daylight from as many directions as possible, especially spaces on the lower levels. A huge element to cultivating such an open and welcoming environment was having daylight flood the school grounds on every level. The design is quite generous with the skylights and glazing. They utilized north lights, the VMS system, which was positioned to the north to reduce glare. The skylights allow light to enter in from both directions, which will give a really nice even light in the space, opposed to having light enter from one direction, which will increase the perception of contrast. The light shafts are also really spacious and open. They were designed to reduce shadow and contrast and act as a well of light that softly illuminates each space below. There are also more general studies that show connections between daylight levels and the improvements in children's learning and test scores. There have been noted higher scores of up to 25% in math and reading. Working in classrooms without daylight can really upset basic hormone patterns. So with daylight, we find there's fewer sick and absent days from school compared to those with inadequately daylight classrooms. There's better concentration and improved vision, and there's also better memory retention. So we see the necessity of daylight and spaces, and we see that very practically in a school and how they were able to design for daylight in this building. This is a warehouse in Nova Scotia. It's a pilot project for new standard of net zero buildings. So the property developer joined the Canada Green Building Council and the Zero Carbon Building to design a warehouse according to CGBC's new certification. So this is a larger development that would include a series of 4 or 5 multi-tenant warehouses. And it was really focused on designing a building that would keep tenants' operating costs as low as possible. They used energy modeling to validate their design, and balancing natural daylight with motion-censored LED lights was really important to the design of this warehouse. It was needed to create comfortable working environments, an important part of the overall design when it came to worker satisfaction and occupant comfort. Dynamic domes were used. So they had a really good insulating value, which was really important for the energy side of the design. It was lightweight and easy transportation and install, which kept costs low. And ultimately, they also were able to provide diffuse and even light in the space. And you see in that image that the whole space has a really even amount of daylight. This is the Velux China office. The new headquarters for this office was designed to introduce a new model of healthy buildings. They wanted to successfully integrate sustainable design practices into their very own practice. They recognize that it's no longer enough to simply resolve issues related only to thermal comfort and energy reduction. The physical and mental well-being of employees cannot be separated from their working environments, especially because they're spending most of their time throughout the day in these spaces. So after investing considerable research to leverage daylight and fresh air as key drivers of improved occupant quality of life, this building was introduced as a new paradigm for healthy, holistic architectural design. Each department had its own needs in regards to daylight, acoustic privacy, and electrical requirements for certain equipment. So a really well-formed design was required and needed detailed studies on energy use, airflow, and task-appropriate daylight factors. So these plans show recreational activities and fitness center on the ground floor with the working spaces on the top floor. So it's a really elegant rectangular plan with a 2-story height atrium running across the length, and this would accommodate for about 50 employees. So on the right, it's showing the daylight factor, which is the percentage of daylight inside compared to outside. So for non-reading tasks on the ground floor, 2% daylight factor was considered sufficient and well daylight, and that worked really well with the program. The second floor was showing a much higher daylight factor. Virtually the whole floor is sufficiently daylight and accommodates well for the work and tasks needed without having to turn on artificial lighting. The design of this new headquarters followed the Active House standard and principles, especially when it came to daylight and views to the outdoors. And this was all done in hopes to usher in a new era of office buildings that are thoughtfully designed to promote productivity, motivation, and pride, and especially health and well-being for the body and mind, all while in the midst of a really busy and competitive work environment. In addition to thermal comfort and low energy applications, the design strategies included natural full spectrum daylight and clean fresh air. And occupants have shown to be much more satisfied and happy with their workplace environment, which contributes powerfully to their overall health and well-being. This concludes the end of the presentation. Wanted to quickly reiterate the main takeaways for today's topic. To identify the unique qualities and benefits of daylight versus artificial light as it relates to human health, development, and comfort. Analyze the use of daylighting design strategies and principle using skylights. Apply product knowledge to choose the appropriate skylight for the project. And recognizing buildings using daylighting from above that emphasize the well-being of people that use the space. Thank you again for joining. The architectural project team, including myself, are here to help answer any questions or discuss any current or future projects you may have. My information is available, so feel free to contact me if there's a project you have in mind where you would like to bring in more daylight into your design and building. And also wanted to remind everyone to check out Russell's presentation about designing for wellness using fresh air from Skylights, where he takes a deeper dive on indoor air quality and natural ventilation. So thank you very much, and hope to see you again soon with more educational content.
Thank you, Monica, for coming and sharing your knowledge and insight with us today. It was greatly appreciated. For more continuing education opportunities, please visit the RAIC website at raic.org/continuingeducation.